All right, let's have that conversation on safety in schools. And joining me in studio now is Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, is the Executive Director of SAWA Agenda. Thank you very much for making time. Dr. Njoki Fernandez is here. She's a school health and safety consultant. Thank you very much for making time. And Amos Kaburu, Chief Consul, Opticum Group. Thank you very much for making time. And I'll start with you, Dr. Manyasa. How did we find ourselves here again?
I don't know. That would be the most honest answer. I don't know how we found ourselves here. I wish that we didn't get here. And maybe allow me to take a second of your time to just send our condolences to the families that have lost these innocent children, and wish those that have been injured a quick recovery. I know they're in hospitals, and also just wish the entire school fraternity of the affected school quick and consolation for the problem that they have found themselves in. We shouldn't be here because after the previous incidents, we set up committees, we came up with guidelines, which if we lived by, we may not be able to prevent accidents and incidents, but we can minimize fatalities and injuries that come from them. I think that is what we are not doing, and that is what we must do.
You did a research on this, and what did you find out when it comes to compliance? The reason I'm asking you why we are here, how we got ourselves here, is because I was doing some research, and this is not the first time this is happening. In 1991, we had the St. Kizito fire, Bombolulu fire 1998, Nyeri High 1999. The list is endless. Changuli 2001. This has happened before.
We have had these incidents. Unfortunately, in each one of them, we have lost lives. And unfortunately, we haven't learned from the unfortunate incidents. So that even though we have developed guidelines on school safety, schools are not living by them at all.
Is that deliberate?
In the study we did last year on secondary schools, we found just 40% of schools were complying with even the distance between beds as required in the dormitories. We found that more than 70% of the schools had never done a fire drill. Never done a fire drill in school to just prepare learners on how to respond should there be a fire incident. We found that even though many of them had fire equipment that was functional, that only 46% of them had a fire assembly place in the event of a fire. So we have never prepared to deal with calamities when they arise. And because of that, we have lost more lives than we should. Accidents happen, they should not take lives if we are prepared to deal with them.
Dr. Fernandez, at this particular point, there's always that attempt to apportion blame. But what is the role of the parent here, and what is the role of the teachers in the institutions and the government itself here?
Thank you very much, Trevor, and good evening, viewers. Before I answer your question on the role of the parents and the role of the government and the role of the teachers, I just want to expand the conversation a bit, because we are talking about fire, but incidences in school are many. It's not just about fire as part of health and safety. We've seen accidents in school that arise, drownings, children suffer trauma and they die. As much as we're mourning this 21 who died in a fire, there was also another incident of a young boy, I think, who was running in some cross-country incident, and he collapsed and died, and we're not quite sure what happened, but it sounds like it was a medical-related incident. We've had incidences around school transport, where accidents in buses, and we've lost lives in school transport. Food hygiene, we had the issue of Mukumu Girls last year, of that whole food hygiene and acute illnesses. So there's a lot around health and safety, not just about fire. So it's a big and broad conversation. Then to your question, whose role is it? It's a multiple role. Each has got their role. If we look at the Basic Education Act, it defines clearly the role of the parents. It defines clearly the role of government. And the role of government in education is to facilitate learning in terms of providing education content. So if you look at the Act, it says that they will provide schools, they will provide teachers, they will provide curriculum, they will facilitate exams, and that government tries to do as much as possible. Yeah, there's a lot of activity, and I think Ministry of Education is one of the most heavily funded ministries today. Now, if you then look at the role of the parent, on the other hand, is to facilitate learning. Because when a child is learning, there are certain things they require. If it's in a boarding school, the child needs to sleep. If they were in your house, you would provide the place for the child to sleep, isn't it? But it's in a boarding school. So then who provides that accommodation? Who provides the food? Who provides the health, the safety, the sanitation? According to the Education Act in the 3rd schedule, this is the role of the parent, isn't it? But then somehow we're either not talking to each other or we are not apportioning the right responsibilities to whoever is supposed to do it. So the parents are taking on the responsibility of government, government is taking on the responsibility of the parents, and in this mishmash, then things fall through the cracks and we find ourselves in this situation that we're in. So in as much as we say that government has tried, one of the areas I feel that they can do a lot is in the area of supervision. Supervision and making sure that our schools are safe spaces for our children to learn. That ultimately, the role of supervision is the role of government. And so I think if we think about it like that, then we can see who should do what.
Okay. Amos, who's failing here?
First of all, condolences to the Indarasha community. No parent really needs to go to collect a body of a child. It's even worse when sometimes you really can't even identify your child. There is a challenge with our ecosystem of safety, and it falls largely to the challenge with our policy making in this country. Our policy making is quite detached from the reality, and that's why we tend to think that we're making policies for implementation in another planet altogether. And that's why you look at some of those documents, including what we keep on citing. I have no idea how we therefore call it the policy, the school safety, like a thing in yellow, because it's something that was developed very fast after the chaos that we are being witnessed in 2008. And so we seem just to have picked it up and say that this is our safety guidelines in the country. So our policy making, if we went back a little bit to ask, what is the goodness of a policy? And the goodness of the policy ought to be seen from the outcomes that it delivers. Because if a policy is so detached from the reality and can't deliver the intended outcomes, then it's not worth that we have been walking from one hotel to the other one in all the beautiful hotels, writing those long documents that interpretation and even implementation is a challenge. I must commend, maybe there are also stories that we are also not told about. And I will challenge anyone to visit a school in Nakuru called St. Mary's Girls Boarding Primary School in Bondeni, and you'll be shocked how the level of safety is understood even by children in grade 3. That is a model school that I've never understood how they get it right. So there are certain things that maybe when we also nationalize our policy making and fail also to appreciate the grounds up approach, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But maybe I went to a homestead. I didn't go to a good school, because there are people who went to Alliance, and those of us who went to St. Stephen Eshtoi Secondary School in Koromaiti, maybe it was a homestead. So sometimes the English we speak, maybe the grammar is not right. So maybe we need to mix kidogo Kizungu na Kiswahili kidogo ndio tuelewane kama wananchi. Yeah. There is a problem. Okay. Because policy making is the responsibility of government. The interpretation of the same also lies with government. Supervision and regulation is on the part of government. And you ask the question, how did we get ourselves back here? And I wondered whether we ever left there. Because it is the same story. Mm. And now we are keeping on again going back to symptoms. And so we just need to accept that we have a challenge in the system. We have a challenge in the ministry. I don't know whether it's a problem with the governance, but the entire ecosystem of safety is not just okay.
Okay.
And it's not just in schools alone. So let's call it as it is. Last week we saw somebody walk to a hospital in Machakos and he was picking phones from the patients. So whether you are in school, you are not safe. Whether you are on the road, you are not safe. Whether you are anywhere, you are not safe.
Yeah, but Manyasa, sometimes is this a policy that is detached from reality or simply just sheer incompetence? Because you've done a research and realized that more than only 40% are compliant with a simple thing as bed spacing, which in case of a fire, it would at least lower the speed of spread. Why is that so
100% transition now? Where do you want to take those children? The government gives you children. Where do you take them?
The problem we have is actually, I don't think it's our policies. I think that for the policies which have been documented, we haven't implemented, so it's not possible to evaluate those policies. We can't tell whether the safety policy works or not because we have not implemented. There hasn't been compliance with it. If we implement and then we continue to see problems, then we say there is faultiness in the policy. But I think the second thing that has happened is that we have allowed political dictates to run the sector. So today someone stands up on the road and says, tomorrow there will be 100% transition. And so the officers in the field are required to implement because that is now the law. There has been no preparation, there has been no analysis to determine what resources are needed where to be able to make this work. So in the process, everything else, the quality of education, the safety of children are compromised to achieve this roadside declaration that we will have 100% transition. The same thing has happened with the safety manual that was created, because this safety manual cannot be operationalized in a vacuum. There is a context. There is a context that talks about what resources are needed to actualize the aspirations outlined in that safety manual. There is a context of responsibility allocation that needs to be taken into account. She has just mentioned to us, Dr. has mentioned to us here about the Basic Education Act and the roles that it gives to parents. Today, parents are not allowed to even see the dormitories, the first place. They are called to school for meetings. So often you come, you discuss what fence needs to be repaired, what shed has fallen and needs to be repaired, but no one shows you the dormitory where children sleep. No one shows you the kitchen where food is prepared. These are very key components for any boarding school. And they are the most important ones for the safety of children, the kitchen and the dormitory. So that gap is causing the problems that we are seeing. We have Parents Association that is allowed to operate, required to operate by the law, but insubordinated. Today, the National Parents Association cannot operate. It's a shell. Why? Because it is not funded by the ministry, and it is not allowed to collect membership fee from parents. Yeah. So what is it supposed to do? Okay. It exists in name only. It doesn't exist in practice. If that happens, how do you expect that parents will play the role envisaged by the Basic Education Act, which establishes the Parents Association, when they're actually encapsulated and disabled to function? So we have these multiple challenges. Yeah. But we need to get to a point where we take time, look at examples that have worked. We have schools in this country that have existed as boarding schools for decades. Some of them for very young children, primary. We have never seen an incident. So we need to ask ourselves, why are some of the schools prone to incidents when others are not? Yeah. Is there a lapse in terms of the people who are supposed to be responsible for the safety of children in those schools?
Yeah, and Njoki, how do we make a direct turn from this henceforth? Because when Manyasa says the research shows that 70% of schools never did a fire drill, That is not something you expect a parent to come and ensure that it's done in school.
Well, okay.
How do we make a complete turnaround henceforth?
I think the most important thing is to be intentional. And these gentlemen don't like it when I keep throwing it back to the parents, because ultimately the child is mine. And when there's an incident and unfortunately there is a fatality like has happened in this, you know, you can't even imagine the grief of the parents. You know, they are so heartbroken. Ultimately, when that child is brought to me in a coffin or is brought to me, you know, some of them, they're saying they cannot even identify their children because of the extent that they have burnt. That child is mine. The loss to me is 100%. The school might continue. The ministry continues. And within 3-4 weeks, we will forget the incident and move on to something else. But to me as a parent, that loss is permanent and it's 100%. So I feel I have a responsibility to ensure the same way that when that child is in my house, I do everything possible to look after that child in terms of the food they eat, the security they have. I make sure, you know, I look after them well. When I take them to school and I'm delegating that responsibility to the school, I should also make sure that the same happens. And I really wish as parents, it's true what you're saying, that you cannot go to the dormitories, which is sad, because when I went to school, my mother was shown, this is where she will sleep, this is where she will eat. And so my mom left with a certain sense of peace. If we demanded the bare minimum, you know, so that as parents, if we can see the conditions in which the children are living, we can then decide to do something about it. Yeah, and we are empowered by the Act. We are obliged by the Act to do whatever it is to look after nutrition, health, and safety for our children. So we have to be intentional. We have to decide one child dead is one child too many. And we have to say, you know, enough is enough. And hold our institutions to task so that then we are able to facilitate the healthcare of the education of these children who trust in us. You can imagine those young kids, you know, between the ages of 9 to 12, I mean, helpless, completely helpless, and they are our responsibility. So we have to make a decision. Yes. You know, we have to say, you know what, enough. And we have to really stop putting things on paper. Yes. There's so many policies. I think I've counted more than 17 written on paper on health and safety in this country. Yeah. But most of the principles don't even know they exist. They don't even know what is written on them. And we are just, you know, operating. So we just need to be intentional and decide, you know what, something needs to
be done.
Yeah.
So, Amos, how do we become more intentional? If there's a document that I was reading in 2008, the school safety guideline, which was there, 2016 years later, some of the things that are there have never been implemented.
And that's what I was saying, and the two are just agreeing with it in many words. We have a challenge with our policy framework. Whether we look at policies as interpreted through the legal framework or policy directions issued either as policy statements or guidelines that operationalize them, there are two things that happen. One, our policies don't speak to each other. Some of them are too contradictory in nature. Because if, for instance, you want to ensure safety of the children and you allocate more children to a particular school and that school does not have infrastructure, so what is the principal supposed to do? The principal is not supposed to turn the children away. The principal cannot build infrastructure. It is somebody else's responsibility. So which policy should the principal use in this case? So we also need, and I think I was having this conversation with Dr. Njengere, the CEO of KICD one time, and we were wondering, do we need maybe a policy of the policies to interpret? Because there seems, as Njoki mentions, if there are already more than 16 policies around the same issue, then what do we need to do? But then some things also just fall on common sense. That's why I've talked about the case of St. Mary's. It's about being intentional. Small children who can use buckets of sand to fight fire, the level of awareness is just out of this world. There are certain things which we need to allow the local school systems as one of the elements of beginning to address the problems that we have in this country. Because the challenge we have with our country is that we tend to nationalize solutions. So right now, what is going to happen? The ministry is again just going again to issue another national policy, ban boarding schools, from now henceforth, and you do not want to look at the local realities of how people interpret. But if we began to empower local school systems so that they begin to think about solutions and think of it from a very, very broad perspective, it's possible for us to find answers. I have never seen any problem. I mean, a few weeks ago, we were doing a caregiver's training at Brookshire schools in Kamulu. And what did it take for us to train house helps on how to do first aid? The security company of the school came to train them. So what is so difficult? We already have resources which are available. People within communities, there is a lot of resources within our availability. And that's why I mentioned that sometimes you listen to some of these and you read through some of these policies. They are completely detached from the reality. Yeah. If we allowed local school systems to decipher what the challenges are and begin to find solutions to their problems, I can assure you that most of these problems will not even be having them. I mean, and that's why you see, and I did mention that the issue of safety goes beyond schools. Today, if you are involved in a road accident, chances are very high that the first responders, and Dr. is here can confirm, the first responders will leave you with more damage than even what the vehicle you are involved in. Because we just tend to think that you go in and you begin pulling people out of the mangled wreckages. The level of awareness is extremely low. You walk into any matatu right now, we leave you and go to your center and you board any matatu, you'll be shocked. You are just walking in a death trap. So even government has a responsibility. I mean, where is consumer protection in this country? And that's the role of government. Okay. We cannot apportion that one and begin blaming your parents. Consumer protection is the responsibility of government. Okay. It is possible that we can just follow whether there are laws. And that's why I mentioned, I don't know whether it's the problem with governance, but the problem is that even the institution that's supposed to hold governance to account now reduces everything to a communication challenge. But if we were just more deliberate in terms of fixing our problems, we will fix them. It's not supposed to be something we keep on talking about every time, and then people are losing children every day, and then you treat these children as statistics. Yeah. I mean, what do you want me to do tomorrow if I find that my child is dead? I mean, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do to my wife? I mean, I have to stay for close to 2 years for her to have another child. What about if I'm above 45? Excuse me, I think we need to reduce this idea of looking at people's lives as statistics and begin to treat human lives as Daktari says. Losing one life is already too many. Okay. Let government, tunaomba serikali, wache sasa leo niombe serikali. Tunaomba serikali tafadhali, chukua jukumu lenu kama serikali, mulinde maisha ya wananchi wa Kenya. Consumer protection. Right. Let's put it on the forefront. It's quite important.
I have to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we're still talking about the solutions going forward now, the drills, should they be incorporated into the curriculum and all, and also keep your views coming at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Monday Report. How do we ensure we don't find ourselves here again? That's a conversation we're having. Taking a quick break. When you come back, I'll take you through some business news and then we get back to the conversation, so don't go too far.